Welcome and thank you for joining today's conference, FERC Order 831, Market Simulation Scenario Training. Please note that all audio lines have been muted until the Q&A portion of the call, and please be sure to open the chat panel using the icon at the bottom of your screen. You may submit questions via the chat during the presentations, and they will be addressed at each Q&A section. When submitting a written question, please select Everyone from the drop-down menu in the chat panel, enter your question in the message box provided, and send. If you need technical assistance, please send a chat to the event producer. And as a reminder, this conference is being recorded. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn the call over to Rochelle Wilpius, Customer Readiness Manager. Please go ahead.
All right, thank you, Michelle. So hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for the FERC 831 Market Simulation Scenarios Training webinar. As Michelle mentioned, my name is Rochelle Wilpius, and I will be taking you through today's session. I'm joined virtually by some of my colleagues who may speak up during question and answer periods or just to provide clarity when needed as we discuss this topic. And they'll be introducing themselves shortly. In an effort to increase transparency and provide greater service to our stakeholders, we are recording this webinar. It's going to be posted on our website so that you can review it in the future and for those who are not able to join today's call. If you wanted to follow along with me in the presentation, this slide deck has been posted to the CAISO.com Learning Center under the new module section. You can download that now. Also, as we progress through the training, I'm going to go ahead and stop for question and answer periods, and we're going to document all the questions that you guys have so that I can update the training accordingly if needed. One small note to that, we have a pretty packed agenda today, so I may limit the question and answer periods during the training so that we can get through all the slides, but I'm definitely going to open up that question and answer period at the end for any additional questions that you might have. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. First, I'm going to actually have the subject matter experts introduce themselves. So maybe, Katie, we can start with you, and then we can go around the room.
Hi there. My name is Katie Wickler. I'm a market engineering specialist at the ISO.
All right. Kevin?
Hey, Kevin Head is here. I am also a market engineering specialist at the ISO. Looking forward to today's discussion.
Thanks, Kevin. Train?
Hi, this is Train Go from the ISO PMO Program Office.
Thanks, Train. And Cindy?
Hi, I'm Cynthia Hinman. I'm a lead client trainer.
Thanks, Cindy. And we may have some others join us throughout the call. So let's go ahead and get started. So in today's training, these are the things we're going to do. We're going to actually review the FERC 831 initiative and the different phases of the project so you know what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to review the key points of the FERC 831 Phase 2 and how that wraps into these market sim scenarios. We're going to discuss the details and the timing regarding the FERC 831 market simulation. I know a lot of you guys have had questions about dates and timing. We're going to complete an overview of each of the 3 different market simulation scenarios so you know what you'll need to do and when you'll need to do it. And we're going to talk about questions that we've received from customers on these scenarios and their corresponding answers. So we heard you. We've put those questions in this presentation for you so that we can review them. And last but not least, we're going to actually view the new energy bid ceiling table in SIBR. I have some screenshots for you along with some new reports from OASIS. Okay, so let's go ahead and get straight into the timeline here. So back in February, the CAISO filed an emergency provision with FERC to allow for after-the-fact cost recovery on those incremental energy costs above $1,000 per megawatt hour bid cap. So that happened in February, and then with regard to the implementation, we split it into 2 phases. The first one was implemented back in March. We implemented compliance provisions so that you could bid up above that cap. And then this training specifically in these scenarios are going to revolve around these enhancement provisions with that additional functionality. So that's really what we're going to be going over today. So let's talk about an overview of what that implementation is, what this Phase 2 is. So here are some of the key points. Essentially, it implements a various set of market penalty parameters that are effective depending upon what's going on in the market or the market conditions. And it implements a screening methodology for virtual bids, demand bids, and non-resource specific system resources. So we're talking about imports and exports here, those bids that are more than $1,000 per megawatt hour. It establishes what we're going to call the MIBP, the maximum import bid price, and it differentiates between RA and non-RA, non-resource specific system resource import bids. So I know that's a lot, and this particular phase 2, that training has already occurred, and I've actually linked the presentation and the video for you right on this slide. So if you download the slide and you wanted some more information about this particular initiative, this project, you can go straight there. I'm going to focus on the simulation scenarios today rather than the information from the actual initiative. All right, so let's do an overview, a quick overview of these scenarios. So the purpose of these 3 scenarios is to showcase the FERC 831 Phase 2 functionality, which is the variable energy bid cap, depending on those certain conditions. So what are those 2 conditions? The first one is that there is a cost-verified bid submitted above $1,000 per megawatt hour. And that is really what Scenario 1 and Scenario 2 focus on, is that particular condition. All right, we'll go over each of those scenarios in depth here in a second, but I just wanted to mention that's what those 2 scenarios are focusing on. The third one is if the maximum import bid price parameter is calculated above $1,000 per megawatt hour, that's what Scenario 3 is going to focus on. Okay, and in case you have questions about how the MIBP is calculated, that can also be found in our FERC 831 training on the KISO.com Learning Center, again, as I have linked here. So I'm not going to go into that calculation in this training. I'm going to refer you back to that previous one. But I wanted to make sure that you understood how these 3 scenarios interface with these 2 conditions that are going to change the bid cap. So the goal of these scenarios is really for you to familiarize yourself with this functionality, and it's going to be implemented mid-June. So right now, the structured market simulation is scheduled to occur starting May 25th and going through June 9th. That's the current date, but that date may be at risk depending on different things that we have going on, and if that changes, we will, of course, notify you, but this is the current scheduled date. We're going to set up data in the map stage environment for you in order for those 2 conditions to be met so that you can observe how the bids above $1,000 per megawatt hour are going to be treated for the different resource types. And this market sim is both for the day-ahead market and for the real-time market. So you'll be able to submit bids for both of those markets. If you wanted to be able to access these scenarios, you can do so on our release planning page. I've listed a screenshot here for you. It's under the FERC Order 831. One note I want to make you is there are 2 FERC Order 831 releases. There's one for the spring, as we mentioned, and there's one for the summer. So make sure that you open up the one for the summer in order to find the market simulation. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go into each scenario in depth. After each scenario, I'm going to pause for questions on that particular scenario, and then as I mentioned at the end, we'll take complete questions about the project. So market sim scenario number 1, really what this focuses on is submitting a manual reference level change request in city that results in a cost-verified energy bid above that cap, above that $1,000 per megawatt hour. And as a reminder, those manual reference level requests apply for all hours of the trading day. And this process was implemented as part of the CCW initiative. So if you want to remind yourself how to do that, how to submit a manual reference level change request, you can go to our training on that CCW initiative, again, as I've linked here. Or you can also refer to the market instruments BPM attachment listed there as well. So that will walk you through how to do this. So what's the actual process? What steps do you need to take in order to complete FERC 831 market sim scenario number 1? So the first thing you're going to want to do is submit a manual reference level change request via city. Now, this usually needs to be done before 8 a.m., but I do want to mention that this step is completely optional during market simulation. When this process is live, you have to do this step, but during market sim, it's optional for you. You can submit a ticket in city, and the CAISO team will process that for market sim, but I'm going to ask that you note that ticket as listed here. So it's for the FERC 831 market simulation, non-production in the subject line so that the team knows when those tickets come in and to process them. Okay, so that's step one, and again, for market simulation, it is optional. Step number two, once that ticket is approved, or if you prefer to skip that step, that revised DEB is going to be used in the CAISO system, and that new value is going to be listed as the default in the CMRI default energy bid curves report. So your default energy bid will get revised, and then you can move on to step three, which is you can submit that energy bid and make the bid adjustment up to your revised default energy bid as listed in SIBR for all hours, because as you mentioned, through this manual process, it's effective for all hours of that trading day. And then, of course, step number four is you can validate that information on your settlement statement, and that can take up to a week to receive that statement. So 4 steps, the first one being completely optional, if you want to or if you don't want to. All right, so now let's go over some questions that we received on this particular scenario. And then I'm going to pause for questions on this scenario only. So someone asked, is it necessary for scheduling coordinators to submit additional energy bids in SIBR if they're already submitting that manual request via city? And the answer to that is yes, it is necessary for you to do that, because in order for scheduling coordinators to fully test that scenario, we have to be able to observe how those bids are handled in SIBR and how that's submitted. So either way, the SC is responsible for submitting these bids in SIBR even after we process this request. So yes, it is required both in city and in SIBR. All right, the second question, what resources are going to be used to test out this functionality? So the ISO plans to submit a manual request for at least one resource-specific generating resource as a baseline for the cost-verified bid. And that resource is going to be one from an SCID that's not participating in the market simulation, so that it doesn't affect your the bids that you're submitting. All right, so I'm going to pause here, see if there are questions on this particular scenario. Don't forget, we're still going to talk about dates and timings a little bit further on during the training, but I don't want to go through all of the scenarios in case you had a question about this one specifically. So, Michelle, if we could open up the phone lines for questions, that would be great.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to ask a question, please press #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. You may also enter your questions in the chat. Please send to everyone. Once again, #2 to ask a verbal question. And we have no questions in the queue.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. So we'll move on with the training, and I'm sure at the end of this you guys will have some more questions. So let's move on to market sim scenario number 2. So with regards to an overview of this scenario, it is going to simulate submitting a bid above $1,000 a megawatt hour via an automated reference level change request. So the situation is the same as in scenario 1. Instead of a manual reference level change request, we're going to do it via an automated one. And just as a reminder, those automated reference level requests only are specific, they are only for specific hours. Okay, so it's not for the entire day. So let's talk about your steps here, just like we did with scenario number 1. So step number 1 for participating in this scenario or completing this scenario is to go into SIBR and complete an automated adjustment to increase that default bid above $1,000 per megawatt hour. So the ISO on the back end, we're going to upload those high prices in order to set those parameters up in the first place. And then you're going to want to use the energy adjustment functionality in the SIBR user interface. Next, you're going to submit the bid. And then you, of course, will validate that settlement statement was updated with the applicable energy cost. And as a reminder, it can take up to a week to receive that settlement statement. Okay, so this one's a lot shorter of a process since you don't need to go into city. All right, so let's talk about some questions we had about this one. So someone asked, at what price is the ISO going to upload that natural gas price as mentioned in the ISO actions of scenario 2? And is it for the day ahead or is it for the real-time market? So the goal here with this scenario is to upload a gas price that is sufficiently high enough to raise that reasonableness threshold default energy bid to that $2,000 mark. So with the appropriate unit heat rate of 10 MMBTUs per megawatt hour, that price is going to have to be around or above $200 MMBTUs. And as a reminder, the CAISO is going to run this scenario for both the day ahead and the real-time market. All right, next question. Can the CAISO provide the trade date and trading hours ahead of time so that the SCs can be more prepared to test the functionality? Is it possible for the SC to submit bids for all hours when testing scenario 2? So the ISO is going to set up conditions for this scenario for more than 1 hour. We're going to take a look at what those time frames are in just a second. So if you have questions on that, hold those questions. We'll look at those. And with regards to the second question, we prefer that scheduling coordinators limit the number of hours that they submit cost-verified bids above that cap because it reduces the opportunities for other SCs to test that functionality. So just a heads up on that piece. All right, so that is our overview of scenario number 2. We still have a lot of information to go through with scenario 3 and some dates and times for you guys. But I wanted to pause here, see if you have questions on scenario number 2 before we move on.
We do have a question in the queue, a few questions.
Sounds good.
Okay, caller, your line's unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Rochelle. This is Chunyu from PG&E. I do have a couple questions. Regarding to scenario 2, question number 2, can you go back to that slide? And how does that, if we, for SC to submit the 24 hours, how does reduce the opportunity for other SCs? I don't understand.
Katie or Kevin, could you help out with this one?
Sure. Hi, Chunyu. This is Katie Wickler with ISO. Thanks for the question. I think the goal here was, to sort of have a bit of a mix of hours in which, for the dates that we're testing the scenario, that we would see the opportunity for resources to bid up to the $2,000 cap and then also to the $1,000 cap. So, having that mix of hours allows folks to sort of test the different conditions within that same day. If we have, a cost-verified bid above $1,000 for all hours of the day, that would effectively set the cap at $2,000 for all hours. We wouldn't necessarily have the chance to see and test out that different functionality between the different bid caps within that same trading day.
Okay, that's helpful. And then also, I think another question is that you're going to have the gas price published in SIBR. Is that, I think back to scenario, last question.
To my knowledge, the gas price doesn't get published in SIBR. We'll upload a sufficiently high gas price to essentially set this scenario up such that there can be cost-verified bids that can be submitted up to $2,000. I think the specific gas price in this scenario isn't necessarily of importance, just that, it's going to be sufficiently high enough to raise those reasonableness threshold depths up to the $2,000 mark.
Right. So do you prefer we using this price, or is that we can just pick a different price, let's say 205? I just want to make sure what is the type of instruction here.
Yeah, good question. So, we'll be sort of putting in this high gas price when we're starting to, process the calculations on our side, and that'll result in reasonableness threshold devs that are essentially, at or around $2,000. And so I think if PG&E uses a similarly high price to sort of estimate what your reference levels will be for purposes of knowing what bids to submit, that would be sufficient.
Okay, good to know. Sorry, one more question. Back to scenario 1. So you talk about the menu submission and submit a CD ticket. If approved, we go proceed those steps. What about if denied? Let's say if we submit the CD ticket and CAISO deny the request, what is the process afterwards? I wonder if there should be a scenario we should test out.
Sure. Yeah, I don't think we're really planning on, we do have sort of a specific set of criteria for analyzing and accepting manual reference level change requests in the production systems, as we've detailed in our CCW materials. Although I think for the purposes of this scenario, the opportunity to submit a manual reference level change request for the market sim is mostly for, the participants to have a chance to test that out. So I don't expect that we would be, applying as stringent of a criteria to the manual requests that we receive as we may normally would in the production environment.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. Michelle, could we move on to the next question in the queue?
Sure, one moment. Caller, your line's unmuted. Please go ahead.
Good morning. This is Alva, also from PG&E. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Just on the load bid in this scenario 2. So it sounds like in the day-ahead market case with the load bid, we would. So basically, we want to be able to put in a kind of our first segment at whatever the price cap is. If we were to put in $2,000 for all day, we would get some form of validation error, it sounds like, because in some hours the cap would be 2,000 and in other hours the cap would be 1,000. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. And I think Rochelle mentioned in a subsequent slide, we'll talk about the hours in which we're actually going to be, planning to set the cap up at 2,000. So we'd expect that, for your load bids, you'd be able to put those in at 2,000 for those specific hours for the scenario, and then, the other hours in which the cap is 1,000. Those validation rules will run on those bids.
Right. Right. In general, would we actually be aware in production of which hours those were?
Yeah. Wendell, do you have any thoughts on that from the SIBR side?
So there's a new screen on SIBR that will show you the hours where the cap is set for both day-ahead and real-time. And it's a new tab. So when you log into SIBR, and you'll click on the Messages tab is the name of it. And then it'll display there the each hour for day-ahead and real-time what that ceiling is. So it'll either be 2,000 or 1.
Or something in between, I guess it could potentially be. Great, thank you.
Well, the ceiling will...
Oh, the ceiling will just be one or the other?
2,000.
Okay.
What?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Could you continue?
Oh, sorry. I said the condition that sets it could be between 1,000 and 2,000. But the actual ceiling would only either be the 1,000 or 2,000. Okay, great. So we'll see that report, and it just, if you indulge me, when is that report going to be visible in SIBR in the morning? Is it like at 9 o'clock, or what's the time frame? It's there for what the ceiling is, and it depends on which variable sets it. So the day-ahead max import bid price is good for the next day when we receive it, and then the max cost verified bid price would be checked as long as there's a bid out there. So if one does happen to get submitted for over whatever the cap is, then we'll pick it up, and then you would see that. Now, because DEBs only go out, also to the next day, for as far as submitting bids that'll get overwritten, then you'll see it for the next day for sure, real time, obviously, and then that's what the plan is right now.
So what's the latest time when I might see the cap reset from 1,000 to 2,000 in that messages tab? For the day
latest time?
For the day ahead. I'm just thinking basically the load ahead.
Okay. So I understand where you're coming from. So you could be looking at that screen. You could be seeing that, okay, hey, the cap's $2,000 for, hours ending 12 through 15. Right. And then that could be based on a cost-verified bid that was over $1,000, so it sets the cap.
Right.
And there could also be a condition where whoever submitted that max cost bid that was above $1,000, maybe they edited that bid, and now it's $999. So there's rules that would reset the ceiling, and that could all potentially happen right up to the close of the market.
Okay. Well, that's a bit of an issue for us, because we really want to have our load bid kind of in place. It's being the most significant bid that we have, obviously. It's kind of needs to be in place. But anyway, that's you're just describing the way things are now. We might want to, complain about that or something. But it does seem like there needs to be an opportunity for the load bid to be corrected at the very end of that process for this to be a fair process.
Correct. And I do believe that there are conditions in which, the market would be either reopened or held open to allow, additional validate.
Okay. Well, that's good to know, and I look forward to maybe getting a little bit more clarification on that. I always appreciate your help on these things, Wendell. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And I did want to let you know that I do have some screenshots for you. So if you're interested in taking a look at what that new table looks like in SIBR, a little bit further on in this presentation, we'll be looking at that. All right. Michelle, are there any additional questions in the queue?
Yes, there is another question in the queue.
All right, let's take that.
Caller, your line's unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Michael Volpe. I'm also from PG&E. Could you go back to the scenario 1 question slide? So, about the manual request. So I think it's number 1. Yeah, I was just curious. I just want to confirm that, this issue, if in production, I realize this is for the market thing, but if in production, this would also be required, or does the manual city ticket kind of take the place of a bid in this instance?
Yeah, I believe this is Katie. Oh, thanks, Katie. I was just about to call on you.
Oh, sure. Hi, this is Katie Wickler. Thanks, Michael. So the way that we have this functionality set up is, we have the avenue for scheduling coordinators to submit this manual request. And that's essentially a request to us, the ISO, to update the resources reference levels, the underlying costs that are used to calculate the resources reference levels. That's not an actual request for the ISO to submit a bid on behalf of the scheduling coordinator. It's just simply the request to update the underlying costs So, the process that we've established with CCW is that the scheduling coordinator would come in, submit that manual request, and then, once we take that price, update it in our systems, the scheduling coordinator could then, go in and submit bids and adjustments in the SIBR interface.
Okay, so the timing, in regards to the timing, I understand there's only a 15-minute window or so for the CAISO to review these manual requests. So that's from 8 to 8:15, something like that?
Yeah, we review the requests that are submitted after 8 a.m. and, as you can understand, there's some timelines we have to work with internally to sort of meet the, it all sort of contingent around the closing of the day-ahead market at 10. So we have some somewhat tight time frames internally to process those.
Okay, but so we would find out whether the request was, let's say it was accepted, we would find that out around 8:15 to 8:30, something like that. I'm just trying to get a sense of, how close until the market close would be. Would we have that information and therefore have to resubmit or modify our bids?
Right. Yeah. Kevin, do you recall the exact timing when those reference levels are updated after the manual request? I think it's around 9.
Yeah. That's right. This is Kevin Hedden. The general time frame is, the manual request is submitted by the scheduling coordinator before 8 a.m. And then there's literally people on the other side of that city ticket who are reviewing the documentation and making sure that it corroborates the request. And then if it does, we enter it into our systems and our systems process. During that time period, probably I would say around 8:30, we would notify the scheduling coordinator that their request has been approved. And then by 9 a.m., I think it's 9:05, the updated default energy bids are published to CMRI. I'm pretty sure that's how the time frame works. Does that help, Michael?
Yeah, that helps. And I seem to recall, I think, from CCW about the potential for the market to be extended. Is that also the case if you're receiving a lot of manual requests?
If we received a number of manual requests, we would consider delaying the market, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. And Michelle, if there are some additional questions in the queue, we're actually going to hold on those for right now. I want to make sure we have enough time to get through all 3 scenarios and show you some tables and some screenshots, but we'll definitely open back up for more questions here in just a minute. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to market sim scenario number 3. Okay, so this one's a little bit different because the condition is going to be different. So the ISO in this case is going to set a condition so that the market import bid parameter is going to be above $1,000 per megawatt hour for that specified set of hours. So what we're actually going to do is all of the other conditions are going to be limited during this period of time so that just this scenario can be tested. So there are going to be no other cost-verified bids above that cap at this time. We just want to focus on this scenario in this case. The steps here are pretty short. During the specified time frame, you're just going to need to submit an energy bid above that cap, above that $1,000 per megawatt hour, and then verify that that looks appropriate on your settlement statement. So we're just verifying that you can submit a bid above that cap during this time frame. So let's go ahead and get into some questions that we received about this one, and I also have some screenshots for you regarding some new OASIS reports. So will the ISO publish the on-peak index values for both the day-ahead market and real-time market that it captures to calculate that MIBP for each market. And due to contractual limitations with the vendor, we cannot post the index values that we use in that calculation. Okay? How many hours is the ISO going to set the MIBP at that 2,000 per megawatt hour cap during market sim for both the day-ahead market and the real-time market? So we are going to set this up for more than 1 hour. We know you might want to check it for more than 1 hour, and we're going to take a look at what those time frames are here in just a second. Is the ISO going to publish that calculated MIBP for each hour or only the shaping factor? And as I mentioned previously, we're not able to post that MIBP publicly. However, that shaping factor is going to be posted on OASIS. This report, combined with the data subscription to the index vector, should allow you to construct a close approximation of what that MIBP is calculated as. And we'll take a look at that report here in just a second. If we're going to be publishing an OASIS report showing the shaping factor for each trade date, when will that be published relative to each operating day? And you can expect that report, that shaping factor report on OASIS by approximately 9 a.m. for the day-ahead market and by approximately 10 p.m. for the real-time market. So let's take a look at what that report is going to look like in OASIS here. I know the data is really small, but you can still see here that the market is for the day-ahead market, okay? And the dates listed here are from 5:10 to 5:18, and you can see the data listed here for all of the hours. The report looks relatively similar for the real-time market, okay? And the last report I have for you on OASIS, you can see there's no data here yet. It will be added soon, is the schedule by tire report as well in OASIS. So you'll be able to run those. All right, so again, I'm going to pause here for questions on scenario 3. I'll open it up to questions about all of these scenarios a little later on in the presentation. I want to talk about dates and times, and I want to show you what that new SIBR table looks like. But if you have questions on scenario 3, Michelle, let's go ahead and open up the phone lines.
As a reminder, please press #2 to enter the question queue. We have no one in the queue at this time.
All right. So let's go ahead and talk about some additional information and questions that you guys might have. All right, as promised, here is the timing. So how will I know which hours I can submit bids over $1,000 per megawatt hour during market sim? So we have different timings for different scenarios here. For scenario 1, all hours for the day-ahead market and the real-time market, okay, because it is launched via that manual reference level checker. For scenario 2, hour ending 14 and 15 for the day-ahead market, and hour ending 19 and 20 for the real-time market. For scenario 3, we have hour ending 19 and 20 for the day-ahead market, and 20 and 22 through 22 for the real-time market. And then the next question. Oh, yes.
Hey, this is Kevin Head.
Thanks, Kevin.
I just wanted to, nothing on the slide is incorrect, but it is not the full picture. So take scenario 2, for example. Any hours that have been allowed to bid above $1,000 in the day-ahead market also apply to the real-time market for that same trading date. So take scenario 2, for example, hour ending 14 and 15 resources that are subject to that $1,000 bid cap can bid in above it for 14 and 15, but then in the real time they can do 14 and 15 and 19 and 20. So it's kind of additive when applied to the real time market, just so folks are aware. And the same logic applies for scenario 3.
Thanks, Kevin. And then if you guys have questions kind of on that timing, I'll pause in just a minute for questions in case you have questions for Kevin on that. And regarding the trade dates on which scenarios need to be tested, we have for scenario 1, 525, for scenario 2, 526, and for scenario 3, 527. Remember, those are the current dates. If for some reason those are at risk and have to be pushed back, we will notify you and let you know. All right, so let's look at some additional questions. So will the ISO publish the hours in which a resource-specific resource has submitted a bid above that cap and that the bid has been cost verified in either or both the day-ahead and real-time market, and if so, when? So the answer to that is no. The ISO is not currently planning to publish this. However, you can determine which of those specific hours that ceiling has been raised in a new tabular report that I'm going to show you in just a second in SIBR, which looks like this. So as Wendell mentioned, on the Messages tab, to the right, you can see a new energy bid ceiling detail table in SIBR that lists each hour and the cap for the day ahead and the real-time market, along with the timestamp for that amount. And that table is going to get refreshed periodically. So, for example, when a participant submits a cost-verified bid above $1,000, that change is going to get reflected on that table when that refresh happens. All right, so I'll give you just a second to take a look. Again, it's on the Messages tab in SIBR right over here to the right. Next question, will the ISO be publishing the daily penalty parameter value in a separate report? And the answer to that is no. The ISO is not currently planning to publish the daily penalty parameter values. That the day-ahead market is going to run with that $2,000 megawatt per hour penalty price whenever the SIBR day-ahead variable ceiling is at that cost for any hour of that day. And the real-time market is going to run with that $2,000 megawatt per hour penalty price whenever at least 1 hour in the market time horizon is at that variable ceiling price. All right, so as promised, that is all the content I have for you, and I want to open it up for any questions you might have about FERC 831 Market Sim at all. So with that, Michelle, can we go ahead and open up the phone lines?
Sure, and we do have a couple questions in the queue. And just a reminder to press #2 to enter the question queue. First caller, please go ahead. Your line's unmuted.
Hi, this is Callie Wells with WPTF. So I had a quick question. A couple times you've referenced, if those market simulation dates were at risk, you would update those once you guys kind of have more information. And then earlier today on the release user group call, they also mentioned that there was kind of this risk of schedule and said you guys would provide more detail during this call. So I was hoping you could elaborate a little bit more on what that risk is, are we potentially looking at delayed implementation, or is it really just a risk on the market simulation?
Hi, Kelly. This is Kevin Head. Thanks for the question. Yeah, I can weigh in on that. So the thing that we can communicate is that the market sim date of the 25th is at risk. Not that currently we're not messaging that the project will be delayed, like the implementation will be delayed. Just simply that the 25th date is at risk, and that we would communicate more specifics if it is indeed delayed. We'll let you guys know on that front. And when we communicate that, we probably will also say when the new dates will be.
Okay, so it's just on the market simulation schedule that those dates are at risk, not the implementation at this point.
That's correct.
Okay, appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
All right, Michelle, next question.
Next caller, please go ahead.
Hey, Dan Williams from Customized Energy Solutions. A couple questions just kind of circling back to the CCW rules and then how that impacts potential bid submittal timing. So I think that you said that the automated reference level adjustments that happen through CCW are only for specific hours. Is that correct? So if someone submits a reference level update, they would be specifying which hours the gas price or reference level is expected to be higher, or how does the specific hours aspect of that come into play?
Hey, Dan, this is Katie Wickler. Thanks for the question. So, and Wendell can weigh in on this as well from the SIBR side, but the way that the bids are submitted for each of the markets is it's at an hourly granularity. So those adjustments and those bids would be submitted in SIBR, at the hourly granularity. And depending on the level that the cost verified bid, the resource-specific resource bid was submitted, that'll affect the bid cap for that specific hour.
Hi, this is Wendell. I was just going to say, Katie was correct in all of that. It really depends on, what's going on in the market and how those bids need to be submitted. So based on the adjustments that would be submitted that would allow the bid to be above 1,000, typically, if it's a day-ahead bid, I could see where all 24 hours would be impacted. But we do need to still cover those instances when, for some reason, maybe it's just the peak hours that had bids above 1,000, or maybe the max import bid price that came in didn't have a max import bid price for all 24 hours that were over 1,000. It's those type of conditions that we're just making sure that we have each of the intervals covered.
Yeah, I guess I may have to follow up on this offline, but I guess I was going back just to the automated reference level adjustment process through CCW, whether those reference level adjustments resulted in only specific hours where a bid could be submitted at that higher level relative to the reference level adjustment. And my thought there was just kind of following the flow of actions that would happen, and most specifically in the real-time market, if asking if there is a possibility for an entity to submit a reference level, an automated reference level adjustment in the real-time market. So once we're into the actual operating day, and whether that would then trigger the ability to, if that reference level adjustment was sufficiently high, then trigger the ability for that resource-specific resource to then submit a bid above $1,000. That would then kick off others being allowed to submit bids over $1,000. Just trying to kind of follow the chain of different things that could happen that could then cause different levels of bids to be allowed into the market and at what time. And maybe it's best if I just write that up in an email and send it over to see if the kind of chain of events makes sense or not.
Yeah,
sure. That would be...
Kevin, go ahead, Katie.
That's all you, Kevin. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I was probably going to say the same thing. Yeah, Dan, I think roughly that sounds correct, but we would appreciate it if you just write it up and we can confirm that understanding.
Okay, and then the one other question is to kind of confirm on this as well. So if whether it's an automated adjustment or a manual adjustment, that gives the scheduling coordinator the ability to submit a higher bid but doesn't require them to. So is it possible that we could be rolling into the real-time market with a scheduling coordinator having the ability to submit a higher bid but not having done so, and then in the real-time market could submit that higher bid that would then trigger the offer cap to go up to 2,000? And would the SIBR report then just be sort of even periodically refreshing into real time to pick up that activity?
So yeah, SIBR would be checking, for those intervals and using the max basically in real time to still distinguish which is the highest bid for that hour. We do get both a day ahead and a real time import bid price, which day ahead would cover the next day out. It would come in today, as an example, at 8 something, and then that would be available. And then tonight, when the real time comes in at 9:40 p.m., as an example, it would overwrite the day ahead in the sense that, it would be using that real time import bid price for the trade date for the real time.
Okay, so the maximum import bid price trigger, sort of the latest that can happen is getting up to, I think you said 10 o'clock for the real time, but then the resource-specific resource bids could still cause a change going all the way through into the real-time market, so sort of at any point. So in the SIBR, we'll be just refreshing to see if any bids have been accepted as we just roll through the real-time day.
Yeah, and that would be reflective of whatever the DEB is for the real time.
Great. Okay, that just clarifies up through a few different ways that things could unfold, so appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
We do have 2 more questions in the queue. Okay, next caller, please go ahead.
Hi, I do. This is Chen Yu from PG&E. From implementation standpoint of view, I do want to ask the question about the RIF again. Earlier, Kevin mentioned that the May 25th, whether you can make May 25th starting of the market sim, it's risky. Is it possible for CAISO to communicate that in the next market sim call, that because we're just 1 week away from starting of the testing, and it would be really good to know ahead of time instead of coming to the 24th. We know the 25th is no longer a valid day for testing. So is that possible that for CAISO know for sure on Thursday, which is, I think we have a market sim at 2 o'clock. Can we expect a firm confirmation in that meeting?
Hey, yeah, this is Kevin. I, unfortunately, am not the one to make that call. I think that seems like a reason, but I can't confirm that we'll have all the information in 48 hours from now, but that will definitely be a likely venue for that communication. Sorry, Chen, to not give you a full answer here.
Thank you. To echo what Kevin's saying too. So again, it's what we're doing is executing the end-to-end, and then after that point, we'll need to evaluate the results and things. So by Thursday's market simulation call, we will have a good idea of where we are. But since the end-to-end will take a few days to run, we may not have the full execution, and even if so, we may not have the full analysis of those results at that point. But we will do our best to provide the full picture of what we do know on Thursday, and then to have a mechanism to be able to communicate even on Friday and Monday prior to the market sim call, whether that's a notice or some other method, as early as we can. Because with the understanding that you'll need to prepare the day before the trade date for this scenario. Okay?
That's right. Yeah. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Trey. Or just keep us posted the most updated information. Thank you.
Of course.
Thanks. Michelle, next question.
Caller, you're unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hello, this is Alva again from PG&E. We've been having some sidebars about Wendell's explanation, and I think we would like to express a real concern with this idea that the scenario he presented of somebody adjusting their bid down to $9.99 a minute before 10 o'clock and then causing our load bids to be invalid, I think is really a recipe for disaster, and it sounds like it would be strategic behavior too. So I'm just conveying the opinion of people who I've been having this conversation with is that once the level is the maximum bid level is increased, it should not be decreased in that kind of last minute fashion, and we'd like to have some way of registering that, because it really is a given that you're talking about having large load bids invalidated by the behavior of somebody who decides to change their bid from $1,000 to $9.99 at the last minute. I think that's an extremely problematic outcome of an initiative that's otherwise has firm foundations. So I don't know what our best venue is for that, but there's a lot of concern that was raised by that scenario, which we really appreciate Wendell having brought up, because we weren't aware of it until he did.
Yeah, and Alva, this is Wendell. To your point, I know we're going to have monitoring in place that will be looking for conditions like this, and we'll also know in advance just by looking at the data that comes in after 9 o'clock. So in those situations where somebody did reset that field, we would be reopening the market to revalidate those bids. But I see where you're going, and I understand, why would somebody submit, $1,200 and then come back with $9.99? Yeah, I can't answer that, but, we will be watching.
There's no legitimate reason, so therefore we would argue that your implementation should just simply say, if you've accepted that somebody is justified in having their bid at $1,200, then at that point it shouldn't go. The cap shouldn't be reduced after that point. You can pick up the pieces after the market runs, but if you are forced to delay closing of the market, and you're essentially going to have to chase down anybody whose load bid is suddenly invalidated, it just seems like not something that was intended by the way this initiative was designed.
Correct. I'm sure that's the point that we will take forward back to policy, and then
that would be
make sure that yeah.
And if there's anything you want us to submit on that, we'd be happy to put together something which we could send either to you or to whatever channel you think is appropriate. But we're fairly concerned about this.
Hey, Alva, This is Katie Wickler. That's a great idea. We would encourage you to submit something in a written fashion, preferably, I think, via city to your client rep is kind of our best avenue, and we will take those thoughts and concerns internally.
Great. Thank you very much, Katie. We appreciate that, and we will do so.
Sure.
Thank you. Michelle, are there any additional questions in the queue?
Not at this time.
Great. Well, I know that there were some questions submitted via chat, and Cindy is working on responding to you guys. Some questions about tech specs getting updated. You can view the chat to see the answers to those. So just as a wrap-up here, As I mentioned in the beginning of the session, these slides are posted on the Learning Center on CAISO.com in case you'd like to review them. I will update those dates and times for you, as Kevin mentioned, so you can look for that either today or tomorrow. And in a couple of days, we're going to post a recording of this training there as well. So if someone wasn't able to attend in person, they'll be able to listen and review to this session. In a few days, you're actually also going to receive an email from me with a link to fill out a training evaluation. And I really want to encourage everyone to take a few moments to fill out this survey. It helps us to continue to improve the training experience for you. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and conclude our webinar for today. Thank you all so much for your participation. I really hope that you found it useful and informative, and I want to wish everyone a great day.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining today's call. Thank you for using event services. Your call has ended, and you may disconnect.